Hello and welcome to another Game Nexus arcade video. Today we're going to be taking a look at Soul Edge on the Namco System 11 arcade hardware. I'm just going to take the camera off the tripod here to show you what we're dealing with here. This is the arcade PCB for Soul Edge, the Namco System 11 arcade board, which is based off of the PlayStation. You'll see here's the standard JAMA Edge connector, which is connecting the power, video, sound, and whatnot. And then here's the auxiliary connector, or the kick harness. And that actually, if you see these little wires coming off here, those connect to the right speaker. And then there's a wire that goes all the way like over here. It's this one right here. It's connecting to the guard button on the controller. And then if we look over here, this is the GBS 8220, or it could be the, I think it's the 8200 CGA to VGA video converter, and you'll see it's going into the VGA plug of my LCD monitor, which we were just looking at a second ago, which is actually in the test mode. I'm going to pop us back into the tripod here. And of course, just like all my other stuff, like the Naomi, I have the Neo Geo controller for the Neo Geo CD connected to the JAMA harness. And now the D button, which is button 4, gets set up as our guard button. Let me just straighten out the camera a little bit here. Currently the game is in test mode, which you press the first switch to the on position. That gives you your test mode. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to flip the switch on the arcade PCB back to game mode. And let's get right into this. And just like in my other videos, you'll see the Namco logo, and here's the intro. And as you can see here, I have the Soul Edge version 2. Which actually is the same version I showed off back in 2011 when I did the gameplay. And of course in 2008 I did the quote-unquote MAME review, which was basically just a version of the PlayStation version, showing me playing that, because at the time it was before I built my current system, which at the time of this recording is a computer that runs a Intel i7 processor. But back then I had Athlon 64 with, I think it was a gigabyte of memory, and that's all. And of course it couldn't run MAME and the capture at the same time. But now I don't have to worry about that because I have the actual arcade PCB, which looks really good. Now, the original Soul Edge came out in 1995, with this one coming out in 1996. I'll see if I can find for you what the differences were. The original arcade version, one of the characters, Huang, wasn't actually playable, which, considering everybody thinks in this day and age, at least for the first Soul Calibur game, it would just be weird not to have Huang. But he was a secret character that you would have had to input a code in order to play in the original Soul Calibur. But of course here, he became a standard character. Now this gameplay with Li Long, that's actually the only loss I left in, because I figured it was only one and it wasn't a big deal. I'm just going to pull up here the full list of differences here, what actually has changed. Of course, you have your increase of characters. Cervantes becomes playable and Huang becomes playable. They were both not playable in the original arcade version of Soul Edge. And each character now has two different color clothings for their two different outfits. You change outfits by holding the guard button when you're picking the outfit. Another new thing they had added was the whole sword lock mechanic, which you'll probably see me You'll probably see me do this a couple times, which is when you basically both strike at the same time using the same type of strike, you'll actually get into this thing where you both have to quickly press the buttons. Now in this game, the super combos, as I always tend to call them, they call them critical edge. Whereas basically you press all 3 buttons at the same time, and you get this combo that can then be extended by pressing more buttons. Now the what's been changed to this as compared to the original Soul Edge is the subtracted value of the weapon gauge when using the critical edge has been reduced, meaning it takes a lot less now. And you can now cancel the command by pressing guard after you do your critical edge combination, the 3 attack buttons. And it can actually be used while guarding. And of course it can now be done in the air. Those are basically your changes to the critical edge system. And now there actually were floating combos or juggle attacks, which weren't in the original Soul Edge. And it says right here that all characters can now make, as they call them, upspring attacks on their opponents who are in the air. Use the joystick in 3 positions, low, medium, high, and the B button to do these attacks. And now in this version, all characters have an unblockable attack. And apparently there was an inequity in the original version, as some had an unblockable attack and some didn't. The move can be cancelled using the guard button, of course, which is a really cool thing. Another thing that was new in version B is they have the time attack mode, which is done by holding A, B, and kick, and pressing start, and then it'll have a different screen in the background, and it'll say time attack, as opposed to just having the normal screen I had. Another thing that was changed was now throws are easier to perform in version 2. And it's not too big of a difference, but there's a subtle difference in the graphics. From what I understand, they've been enhanced a bit in version 2. That's one of the main versions. I ended up getting this version of the PCB as opposed to the original PCB. Now the way that this works on the JAMA harness is A, B, and kick are all on the JAMA harnesses buttons 1, 2, and 3. When you're wiring up your button 4, you have to wire that up as guard, which is one of the pins on the auxiliary harness or the kick harness that I ended up having to wire up. The only thing I found is that the guard button can be quite sensitive, and it seems like it doesn't take much for the game to think I'm actually pressing guard, which a few times in this gameplay you'll notice like my character just goes crazy and starts guarding a lot, which is weird and doesn't make a lot of sense, but it just happens. And that's just because the game, for some reason, the game just keeps thinking I'm pressing guard for some reason. And now the default setting wasn't actually the 1 match per game, but that's just how whoever had this before had it set up. So I just actually left it that way because it just made for a quicker gameplay. And you'll notice between a couple of these matches, the time up there by where it says stage 9 changes. It's because I had a lot of losses to some of these characters, so I actually cut them out just to make this a bit of a quicker gameplay. Because more or less with this Li Long gameplay here, I took about a 33-minute video, made it an 11-minute video. Now, as I was saying, the original arcade version of Soul Edge came out in 1995. And then it wasn't until May 16th of 1996 that you got this version 2 with all the enhancements. Which, from what I've described, you can see it actually is some decent improvements over the original version. So it was a pretty nice change there. And now here's Cervantes. We're gonna take care of him real quick. Now this has to be one of the characters that I had the biggest problem with. If you had to see all my losses to Cervantes, it probably took the longest of any character. Because he just kept beating me really bad. I don't know if it was the most noticeable thing, but since this version is often also called version C, as opposed to just version 2, but basically you had your version A, which was the versions that came out originally. Then I believe there was a version B, but strangely enough, I haven't seen much information about version B, and it's, for that matter, not even in MAME. But apparently version C, the biggest change that happened to it graphically, of course, if you want to be interested, is Taki actually gets a bit of a bounce in her bust. So if you look at that very closely, you might notice that. And I'll let you enjoy Li Long's ending here with the little book. Now, of course, that was a abysmally bad time. It basically took me 17 minutes of game time to actually get through this. And as I said, that resulted in like a 33-minute video. But I figured I'd do a bit of a bonus play here with Seung Mina. And this is her alternative outfit. I had to hold the guard button and then press the A button to get her in this default blue outfit. Now, there were a couple losses in this gameplay. The only place I really lost all that bad was when I was facing Cervantes. So that was the only losses I actually cut out, because I lost him quite a bit, sadly. Although I believe it only took me up to like 5 or 6 minutes, which wasn't too bad. My best playthrough with Seung Mina was before I even actually had gotten the audio hooked up, because I had no idea how to hook up the audio. But I had a old pair of speakers that came with this like boombox thing, and they plugged into the back with like those clip things that you hold the clip down, push the wire in, let the clip go, and then that would be how the wires connected. And since these were unamplified wire speakers, and the arcade board, if you notice that little metal thing on the side of the board, which would indicate it has an amplifier, and of course there's a little potentiometer which would allow you to adjust the volume. You need to have the unamplified speakers for that, because the biggest problem is if you connect unamplified amplified speakers to an amplified arcade board, you could actually blow out your speakers, which would really be fun. But luckily I had these old speakers around, and it actually helped quite a bit. I might have mentioned this oh so many years ago, which actually at this point is 6 years ago, in 2008, when I did the MAME review that I called it at the time, where I just showed the PlayStation version. But one of the things with this game, and of course Dead or Alive back in the day when I first saw them, that I thought was amazing, considering this is like PlayStation based technology, is like how the clothing flows, like the skirts and everything. I always thought that was amazing, like back in the day, because I was still used to games like Battle Arena Toshinden and the original Tekken, how they didn't really have anything that really moved, and then you see like this free moving fabric. And it is just one of those things that was astounding back in the day, when you're just used to all these static models that have no like moving parts. And one thing I definitely have to say about this game is it has excellent music. In fact, the PlayStation version has the original arcade soundtrack, then an arranged version of the arcade soundtrack, and then the a special, like, I think they called it the Super Session version, which is basically a complete remixed version of the arcade audio specially made for the console version. Whereas, of course, the arcade version here only has the arcade audio. But it's still really cool to hear this. And one thing I want to clear up that I had said back in 2008, that I thought it was cool that every character spoke their own language. I don't know if anybody actually commented about this, but Seung Mina is actually Korean, so she should actually be speaking Korean. So her speaking Japanese, if you go back and watch that video, I made a comment that she's speaking Japanese, and that's right, but she's Korean, so she really should be speaking Korean, not Japanese. But it was kind of a cool touch that you get characters speaking multiple languages, but at least it's not as obnoxious as say the story mode of Tekken 6, where you'd have a character speaking in Japanese, then a character speaking to that character in English. It just didn't seem to go all that well, unless it was one of those things where a character could understand a language but not speak a language. But that would just be weird. It's like, you see Kazuya, and he's like spouting out the Japanese, then another character walks up and just converses with him in English, which doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like how in Street Fighter 4 I could change everyone's language, and the only one I actually set to English was Rufus, because I just thought he was hilarious. He's like, Galactic Tornado! Space Opera Symphony! And honestly, Rufus's voice was a lot better in English than it was in Japanese. See, now there's one of my losses to Voldo here, which, as in my earlier video, I'd commented that he had, he doesn't look nearly as creepy as he looked in, the Soul Calibur. Of course, the CG picture looks a bit creepy, but of course, in Soul Calibur and its resulting sequels, he ends up looking a lot more creepy. And I definitely have to say, it probably at this point it pretty much goes without saying that Seung Mina is my favorite Soul Calibur character. And then my second favorite would have to be Shanhua, who of course doesn't join until Soul Calibur. But of course then they got rid of both of them in Soul Calibur 5, which is another reason why it didn't do too well, is because too many characters were gotten rid of in that game, and not enough of the originals were kept. And our good friend Huang here was replaced by Yoon Seung in Soul Calibur 2, so he actually only is in 2 games. I believe they added him as a bonus character in Soul Calibur 3, but then in Arcade Edition he got a more fleshed out moveset for Soul Calibur 3 Arcade Edition. I think I'd shown something in my arcade gameplay of that. And if you ever see me do that in any of my videos where, like, I lose, and then you see it quickly flashing to the screen, it's just me getting, like, really annoyed that I lost and just going quickly to the, get into the, try again. And one thing I think is really cool, I don't know if you've noticed while watching this video, is that when the, stages change, I mean, when the, as the time goes on, the time of day will actually change. You'll notice how it's getting lighter and darker, and it's turning into twilight, and then afternoon, and then morning. I always thought that was a really nice effect in this game, which I'm honestly, offhand, I'm not sure if the PlayStation version did that or not, but it seems pretty seamless in this. Of course, as we all know, it happens a bit too quick, but of course it's a nice little touch. And here's Li Long with his first costume. Interesting side note, in Soul Edge, which is the Japanese version for PlayStation of this game, which eventually got changed to Soul Blade for Europe and United States. And from what I understand, the reason it got changed that way is there was a game store called Edge or something like that, and they didn't want people to get confused thinking that it was part of that chain or anything to do with that store, so they got rid of the name Soul Edge and named it Soul Blade, because it would be a lot better for people thinking that they're getting that affiliation with a certain game store. Now, I definitely think Seung Mina's second outfit here looks really nice. If you remember in 2008 when I did the PlayStation version. She had a couple more outfits in there because they fleshed everything out, of course, even adding more weapons for each character. And whenever I see those lines in the that follow the weapons, it makes me think of when you mess up when you're trying to edit Soul Calibur 2, and you make the weapon, you don't bring over the weapon model, and you change the character's fighting style, and it becomes invisible. You still see those lines, which is really weird. And that's one thing I definitely have to say is my favorite piece of music in Soul Edge has to be Bravely Folk Song, which is the song that's playing right now. I definitely have to say the backgrounds look a bit better in the arcade version than they do in the PlayStation, but then again, most likely I'd imagine the System 11 hardware was a little bit stronger than a standard PlayStation spec, because you know they always end up giving you a bit more hardware, because instead of having running off of a CD, you have to run off of ROM chips, so usually you get a bit more like sound memory, at least. Especially like with Naomi, I think had like twice the sound memory Dreamcast due to the fact the sound had to stream that way. And I have to say that was like the most lucky victory I had like in a while there, that I just happened to win. And I know I'd mentioned this in 2008, but Soul Edge to me I think is like the beta version of Inferno, because he kind of has that same mannerism to him where he's kind of like Cervantes, but he has his own thing where he like disappears and twirls up and everything. So he more or less is like the precursor to Inferno, who of course was featured in Soul Calibur 2 as only a non-playable boss character, Charade being his replacement, and then in Soul Calibur 3 Arcade Edition, Inferno was another non-playable boss character that you would face. He was your sub-boss, if you remember in my arcade video for that game. And now, just like Inferno, the only thing that Soul Edge actually does when he makes sound is he'll just make like some grunts and some growls. So he's not that really much of an expressive character. Now, just like the Cervantes video, that was pretty close, but not nearly as close as the Cervantes. And of course, since this was like nearly, I think, 7 minutes or so, or maybe a little bit more, this doesn't beat my previous total, so I don't get to enter my name. And here's Seung Mina's intro again, if you don't remember, from 2011. Yeah, as you can see, that was nearly 8 minutes for this playthrough, so not gonna beat my 4 minutes and 30 seconds, which was my actual second playthrough on this arcade board. My first arcade playthrough was about 11 minutes, but that was more or less when I first got it hooked up to the GBS 8200 here for play on my Samsung computer monitor. I can honestly say this is one of many games that tends to look better on the CRT because that's what it was made for as opposed to the LCD. But yeah, that's Soul Calibur, Soul Edge version 2 for the arcade. Definitely an excellent game. I would highly recommend it if you want to just pick up the PlayStation version, or if you like your arcade stuff and you want to pick up the System 11 board like I have. It's really worth your time, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who likes the Soul series. Well, until next time, this has been another Game Nexus Arcade video, and I shall see you later. Bye.